The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. In the course of his teaching, Jesus said to the crowds, "Beware of the scribes who like to go around in long robes and accept greetings in the marketplaces, seats of honor in the synagogue, and places of honor at banquets. They devour the houses of widows as a pretext and recite lengthy prayers. They will receive a very severe condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and observed how the crowd put money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow also came and put in 2 small coins worth a few cents. Calling his disciples to himself, he said to them, "Amen, I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all the other contributors to the treasury. For they have all contributed from their surplus wealth, but she, from her poverty, has contributed all she had, her whole livelihood." The Gospel of the Lord. This Gospel, I think, dovetails directly with tomorrow's remembrance of Veterans Day. What is a veteran? Well, she or he is precisely like the woman in this Gospel passage. This unnamed woman mentioned by St. Mark contributed all she had, her whole livelihood. So what's a veteran? Well, a veteran is someone who is willing to write a blank check payable to the United States of America for an amount up to and including their life. As I reflected on this gospel, I thought about my years in Uniondale and St. Martha's after my father had died. On Saturdays, I would pick up my mother and drive her in her car to someone's house in Rockville Center for dinner or to a restaurant. And once a month, she wanted to get her car washed on Peninsula Boulevard in Hempstead on the way home to West Hempstead at this drive-through place so that she didn't have to get out of the car again. It was cheaper at night after 7 p.m., only $10. More than once, she saw that I had a $10 bill to pay and a $5 bill for the tip. And she would say, "Why are you only giving a $5 tip?" I said, "Well, the whole thing cost $10. And she said, "They make it cheap so that you can give a big tip. And besides, you can never be generous enough. You can never be generous enough." That was the way that she lived her life. That's the way of the life of a service woman or man, a veteran. That's the kind of person the poor widows were in the first reading and in the gospel we just heard. And in this gospel, Jesus begins by denouncing religious leaders who demanded more of the poor than themselves. And so St. Mark's set the emotional tone for this scene by placing it just after Jesus had expelled all the money changers from the sacred temple space. And Jesus had described religious leaders saying, "They devour the houses of widows." And so for the observant Jew, there could be hardly a more severe censure than that. And speaking of the widow, Jesus communicated 2 distinct messages. One was admiration. Admiration for an impoverished woman who trusted enough to rely on God alone. Unlike his disciples who nervously ignored Jesus' talk of his upcoming sacrifice on the cross, she fearlessly gave her all. This widow modeled deep and generous faith. And we know so many among us who do that. At the same time, Jesus was condemning those who paraded around in rich vestments, remaining aloof from and even taking advantage of the destitute. So his praise of her was a rebuke to them. And typical of gospel paradox, Jesus interpreted the scene before him as if it were a play, revealing how the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And he made it clear that, like the emperor who strutted around in his invisible new clothes, pretentious religious leaders who take advantage of the lowly unintentionally mock their own arrogance, while people, like the widow, express their freedom and dignity by caring for the common good, no matter what the cost. So, when you think about this passage, practical people, when you hear it, practical people may say that the poor widow is irresponsible and unrealistic, and that she should care for herself and not risk needing the help of others. Or cynics might see the scene as a reckless management of resources and blame her for her own poverty. Others might believe that she should take care of herself first and then give if she eventually has a surplus. But Jesus praises this poor lady, and she says that she put in more proportionately than all the others. And so her example and the witness of the widow in the first reading, the simple jar of oil that God continues to fill, dares others to believe that generosity, like love, need never be considered a limited resource. The example of the poor widow in the days of Elijah and this poor lady that Jesus is observing on the other side, as you can see on the front cover of the bulletin, can challenge us, like our veterans, to act, to give, to serve like they do in different ways. So this is their free, courageous, faithful ways of doing something, doing more for God. So as we draw near to the end of the liturgical year, the church calls us to think about the meaning of our lives. The widow, veterans challenge us and offer an inspiration. Can we become free enough to trust that love, to trust that generosity are permanently renewable resources with which we can create a different world, a better world. Many folks can be, kind of scared to death of the implications of this story. Sometimes I always think about, matching the cost, if not going beyond the equal tip of the car wash. This gospel is as challenging as the one, we heard a few weeks ago, where Jesus tells a thoroughly obedient man that he's followed all the commandments to sell all that he has and then come and follow. It's too Franciscan. It's too much like St. Francis. It's too much like Pope Francis for most folks. But perhaps we could think of a second option. If we start giving to some cause, some charity, for every dollar we squirrel away for our own futures, what will our children think of us? On the other hand, what lessons are we teaching them, and what sort of future are we fashioning for them if we don't? I'm the first to admit I'm not about to go out and sell everything. But to put 1 or 2 extra pennies, not a blank check like the veterans do, at the service of others in whatever way that manifests itself, seems like a better thing for us to consider doing. It's a far cry, certainly, from the widows in the 2 readings we hear today, or certainly our veterans, but it's moving in the right direction. To whom much has been given, something at least in return, as Jesus tells us, should be expected.